Hey, good morning from Cincinnati. How are you guys doing? I'm really, really excited to be in Singapore. If anything, I wish I could be physically in Singapore, not in Cincinnati, Ohio. But hey, you know what? It's been a crazy time. I'm not even sure if we have a new president or not, and that's the least of my problems. But I think the big question here is, are you as business leaders thinking of going on the offensive? And if you look at me like I'm crazy and say, what are you talking about? Haven't you noticed there's a pandemic around you? Haven't you noticed that, there are cost pressures? The fact of the matter is, what I'm going to share with you today is, in the midst of all of these challenges, fortune favors the brave. And I'm going to use some of my own personal example from having worked at Procter & Gamble for 27 years to make that particular point. But let me take us back a little bit and bring us into the pandemic. Clearly, there are a lot of signs that maybe, at least from a vaccine and other standpoint, things may be getting better. But make no mistake, we are in stage 2 of a 4-stage recovery process for any given economic crisis. Now, I know this is a medical crisis, but equally, it is an economic crisis. And I've had the opportunity of, over the period of about 20 years, studying global economic crises, from the ASEAN crisis to, the 2008 global crisis to, Russia in the 90s and China and so on and so forth. And here's what I have learned. What I have learned is that we start with the stage which is scramble. So think in terms of, let's get everybody to work from home. Then we stabilize. But then that's only the beginning of the journey. Because next, you have to start paying the piper. You spend money in the pandemic or in the global economic crisis to recover, and then the productivity hits start to come. And then, of course, you stabilize in stage 4 at the next level. So make no mistake, the opportunities are still yet to come. Now, let's think in terms of actually what previous economic crises have taught us. So what you see up there, in case you can see it, is a graph that was done by Bain on the previous global economic crisis from 2008. And it mapped companies that ended up being dramatic winners versus other organizations. And they noticed something very interesting. What they noticed was that the companies 10 years later that ended up being disproportionate winners actually started to pull away from the competition during the crisis, not after the crisis. Secondly, what they started to notice was that these companies that won actually increased their profitability during the crisis. So I pose to you, learning from history, is this not the time to start to be on the offense? I also pose to you, the world's best weapon on driving growth, productivity, and pulling ahead of competition is digital transformation. That is why, for each and every one of you, this ought to be an opportunity of a lifetime. Well, ladies and gentlemen, what I'd like to do is kind of share with you my own story that brought me to this conclusion. I have to pay Rama for all of the advertising that he does for my book, but Rama and I are very, very close friends. And I love Rama because what he does is out of passion. And what I have learned through a 35-year career that started off first in the US and then back in Asia, where I had the opportunity to grow with the IT and shared services industry. I started up the first ever shared services center in the Philippines in 1993, and then continued with the wave of the industry as I led the global outsourcing of Procter & Gamble from Cincinnati. This was a 10-year, $8 billion deal that kind of triggered the whole industry. And then I had the opportunity to run operations at Procter & Gamble in every region of the world for IT and global business services. At P&G, that's about a $2 billion kind of entity. What I learned from this journey is that nothing replaces passion, nothing replaces strategic discipline. And what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at a very, very prosaic email exchange that I had in the year 2015. You see, in 2015 at Procter & Gamble, I had a little bit of an ironic problem. We were considered externally to be best in class when it came to IT and global business services. But you know how it is when people think you're best in class and you say, no, 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 you don't know what goes inside here. I know there's a big opportunity. So I started to reach out to 100 different organizations to say, hey, what do you think is the next generation of IT and shared services? And this is an email exchange between myself and the leader of one of those startups. And we went back and forth trying to set up a meeting. This is what the email is about. And eventually, AJ, who's the CEO of the company, said, copying Amy, who will find a date. Amy came back in that email and said, here are all of the dates. Now, the reason I tell you this boring story is if you clicked on Amy's name, X.AI, you find that Amy is a robot. I had said earlier in the chain, I'm not available this next week. None of the options generated by Amy was in that period. Ask yourself, which is one of the most people-sensitive jobs in a company? That's probably the admin assistant's job to the CEO. And then look at the date, 2015. In 2015, despite all of our beliefs that AI is not ready, you had startups that were continuing to use AI in several critical jobs. And what that taught me is that we cannot ignore Moore's law anymore. You see, the curve that you see on the slide there, you're very familiar with Moore's law, the doubling of price performance every 18 months. But there's something unique about this timing. You see on that graph that by 2023, you're going to be able to go out and buy for $1,000 the computing capacity of an entire human brain. Think about it just for a second. A human brain is a marvel of nature. And even the idea that you could go and buy the capacity for $1,000 is absolutely nuts. But of course, it doesn't stop there, because 20 years from 2023 or thereabouts, you're going to be able to buy for the same $1,000 the computing capacity of all brains on Earth. I do a lot of consulting with Fortune 100 boards and CXOs, and this is their biggest concern. They keep asking me, how should I think of organization capability if I'm making choices between $1,000 computers and humans in the next several years? And what I learned from all of that was something that you already know today, that the reason why all of this is happening is because we are in the midst of an industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution. And unlike the previous industrial revolutions, the difference is that the first three industrial revolutions, which was steam power, mechanical energy, the second one was electricity, the third was the internet. In the fourth one, it's not just about one technology being disrupted. It's about digital technology disrupting all other technologies, medical technology, mechanical technology, social technology. All we're doing is we are trying to highlight the lessons from previous industrial revolutions. Think back to the second industrial revolution. Think back to the birth of the internal combustion engine and the car industry. No amount of continuous improvement projects on a horse carriage would lead you to an internal combustion engine and a car. This isn't the time to do 20% improvement or 10% improvement. This is the time to do 10x improvement. And once again, as I started in my journey at Procter & Gamble to think about doing a 10x disruption for Procter & Gamble's shared services, I came across a little article about the world's smallest computer. This was from the University of Michigan. And actually, you can see this in the picture. You've got the white thing is a grain of rice. The small thing next to it is the world's smallest computer. It is about 1 millimeter. This was at that time, 4 or 5 years ago, 1 millimeter thick. And it was all very, very cool. I had that opportunity about 4 years ago to work with the next generation of the world's smallest computer, which came out through IBM Labs. And we collaborated with them at Procter & Gamble. That one was 1/10 the size of this one. So 0.1 millimeter, so the size of a human hair. And that's crazy. But you know, it wasn't an IoT device. It was a fully functional computer with the capacity to input, processor, output of an IBM PC XT or an AT. But that's not even the crazy thing. The craziest thing was the intended price point for this was 2 cents. Think of what these little grain of sand sized computers could do to your supply chain. You could throw some of these in every bottle of shampoo. What could it do to your finance organization in terms of accounting? What could it do to your marketing, your sustainability, so on and so forth? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the opportunity that we have. This is why digital transformation is absolutely critical. But then you have a slight problem. 70% of digital transformations fail. And this has been proven through studies that were done previously, which is really, you know, where a lot of my research came in, and the book that Rama references. What I tried to do is get into the details of that and see why that fails. And I came up with 2 very simple answers. One is language. When you and I talk about digital transformation, it's possible that what you think is digital transformation is very different. You may think artificial intelligence, robots, Elon Musk, computers in the brain. I may think digital watches, which I've had since the 1970s. And so I came up with this 5-stage spectrum to help CEOs and senior leaders get very precise on what stage are you talking about, right? And then to execute that, to Rama's point, I came up with a set of 10 disciplines using checklist methodology that I've learned from the airline industry that could help you be successful. And that's really what's called out in the book. But I'm not here to sell the book. What I'm here to do is to tell you, when you think of digital transformation, including my first few slides on the studies from Bain and economic crisis, be very, very clear in how you define digital transformation. The only definition of digital transformation that makes sense in today's world is to rewire yourself and your company and your enterprise so that whoever is successful in the current 3rd industrial revolution era continues to be successful in the 4th industrial revolution. That is the only definition of digital transformation that makes sense in today's world. Going back to P&G, I was fortunate to reapply all of that to try and to actually disrupt the Global Business Services Organization there. What you see up there, a very crowded slide, is about 25 different projects, which were all about disrupting 10x changes. So why don't we simply get rid of things like travel and expense reporting and back office processes of 3-way expense receipt matching and replace that, just like Google's done, by data that self-generates travel and expenses reports, using AI to do procurement, smart buying, using, again, AI and blockchain to eliminate the entire process of invoicing for global products and shipping. So some pretty interesting things. And I want to leave you with 2 tips from the 10 disciplines that's laid out in my book. One is, make sure that in addition to your 10% continuous improvement, you are also doing 10x disruptive innovation. Google has a great formula, which they call 70-20-10, where they say 70% of the capacity is against day-to-day operations, 20% is against continuous improvement, and 10% is against disrupting yourself, right? Now, you don't have to have 10% of your capacity against it. I had less than 0.5%, but less than 0.5% gave me some of the successes that I showed in the previous slide. The point is, during industrial revolutions, that 3rd leg of the strategy, which is disrupt yourself, is incredibly important. And then the second tip I want to leave with you is my favorite HR law, which is called Martek's law, which basically says that, you know, technology changes exponentially, but human capability changes not even linearly. It's actually worse than linearly. It's logarithmically, which flattens out. So the longer you wait, the bigger challenge you have between your organization's capability and what startups are starting to do with technology. So again, I want to kind of wrap up by saying, look, yes, this is a crazy time, but equally, look, yes, this is a time of immense opportunity. You have to grab this opportunity by the horns. You have to go on the offensive. There is a lot of information available on how you can do that. And I wish you all of the best, because this particular conference has done a great service in bringing some of those tools and techniques for you to be successful. Thank you very much.